Now that was a good time. The season finale of Star Wars Rebels really had me on the edge of my seat basically throughout its entire runtime. Granted, since I wasn't able to watch it online this time, I actually had to sit through Disney's 15 minutes of commercials and 15 minutes of show, or at least that's what it seemed like. So that was that. I wish I had gotten the opportunity to watch it online a week in advance, but it wasn't released online a week in advance. And something that actually kind of confused me at first is that I believe the original order for season 1 was like 16 episodes. I could be wrong, but I could have sworn it was a little bit more, whereas now it's like 13. So that actually kind of had me perplexed when they said this is the season finale, Fire Across the Galaxy. So on that note, I will say that's basically what I said at the beginning of the video. This was a fun ride, but actually that kind of contributed to some of its very minor issues. Now basically, if you don't know, it's a continuation of where the previous few episodes were leading up to. Kanan is still a prisoner of the Empire, and the remaining 4 members of the Ghost crew with Chopper go to rescue him. There's this big Imperial fleet above Mustafar, the lava planet from Revenge of the Sith, and Kanan is being interrogated by the Inquisitor while Tarkin is commanding the ships over Mustafar. So the rebels basically go on this operation to rescue him. So, and in addition, there are a few surprise cameos at the end. I'll discuss those in a second, because that actually ties into why I like this episode and why I think it's a pretty good season finale. But first of all, for the most part, this episode really was just kind of wall-to-wall action. Basically, from the 5-minute mark onwards is just a non-stop thrill ride. The rebels are sneaking into this Imperial Star Destroyer. They're running through the halls. They're shooting stormtroopers. It's very old school Star Wars. It's very reminiscent of when the main heroes, the main group of protagonists in the original Star Wars movie were kind of running through the Death Star and dodging perils and pitfalls and shooting stormtroopers. It was very, very reminiscent of that. And it eventually all culminated in a sort of 3-way lightsaber battle between Kanan, Ezra, and the Inquisitor. So on that note, in terms of being a swashbuckling adventure, this episode really excelled, and I was really impressed. And I'll get to the animation in a second, because the animation was pretty impressive. The animation has been impressive basically all across the board on this show up to this point, but basically the only real issue I had with this episode is that it didn't really take its time much. It didn't really take a whole lot of time to really breathe. Again, aside from maybe the first 5 minutes, it was just kind of non-stop action. Like we're rescuing our comrade, we're sneaking into this Imperial base, action, fight scenes, chase scenes. It was eventually it got to a point where I was kind of thinking to myself, okay, why don't we slow down? Because the fast pace actually didn't really leave audiences much time to catch their breath. And for kids watching, I don't really think that would be an issue. But for someone like me, or for even an old school Star Wars fan who's watching this show, they might actually want a little bit more time to breathe in their Star Wars, especially for something like this show, which has shown that it is more than capable of taking that time to breathe. Basically, most of the previous 2 episodes were really more conversation than action scenes, which I guess they felt, it's the season finale, we have to send things out with a bang. So just go wall-to-wall action. If they've probably felt that they earned it at this point, and you could argue that they have, but I think what would have really made this episode possibly the best in the entire season, it's already definitely one of the better ones, but probably would have made this episode, without going into any sort of hyperbole, or at least not intentionally, the best episode of the season, was if it had a little bit more in the way of downtime, a little bit more of the runtime, albeit it's a short runtime. This is 22 minutes. It's not like the normal TV dramas, which have 40 like over 40 minutes to do it, like Justice League, the original Justice League had 40 plus minutes to tell their story. This is 22 minutes, so I understand why it's like the way it is. But I think if we had gotten a little bit more time to digest what was going on instead of just, you know, relentless action, then I think it would have made the action that is there much more impactful, and I think it would have made the story resonate a little bit more than it did. Really, the stories kind of served as a sort of second priority to the action in this episode. The action which I was invested in the action because I like these characters. I like the arcs that they built up. And speaking of that, they even brought back some stuff, some of the plot points, and you know almost, I suppose you could call it a Deus Ex Machina, but they actually brought some stuff back from previous episodes, because the episode that I didn't particularly like, where Ezra and Zeb were on that sort of errand, and they stole a TIE fighter. That episode wasn't really all that great. In fact, I dare say it wasn't even very good. But they actually brought that TIE fighter back, and I actually did audibly laugh when Ezra was like, well, we might be able to use it. I mean, it's not exactly the same as when we found it. And Hera and Zeb are like, what do you mean? And Ezra and Sabine basically have this kind of moment of, yeah, about that. And they cut to the Star Destroyer, and it's been completely graffitied. It's one of Sabine's crazy paint designs. And at that, I was just kind of okay. And they actually brought it back to a pretty funny moment. It was kind of stupid funny, in that you're laughing at the stupidity of the stormtroopers again. But when the stormtroopers saw this paint, one of them said, "That's not regulation," and another guy said, "I don't know, I kind of like it." So yeah, just little moments like that where they acknowledge, okay, this is fun, where they acknowledge that this tone is supposed to be fairly lighthearted, kind of like the original Star Wars. How the characters can stop every once in a while and sort of laugh at some of the absurdity of the situations that they get into. So yeah, this episode did have comedy, but what I was actually really impressed with was this very, very small exchange between Kanan and the Inquisitor, when the Inquisitor is really doing what he was billed as a character to be able to do, which is, you know, really be able to use his knowledge of Jedi to really get inside Kanan's head. Because he basically said, what was the last word that your master said to you? Your master during Order 66. What was the last word she said, or he said, whatever it was? And Kanan said, run. And basically the Inquisitor really starts to use this. He gets a hold of something sensitive, and he just keeps exploiting it. And I actually thought we could have used more of that in this episode. And that kind of ties into my earlier complaint about, you know, not enough downtime. But the fact that the Inquisitor is actually doing what I expected him to be doing since the beginning of this show was actually really effective from a dramatic standpoint, because we actually know why Kanan has some of the regrets that he has, and why he sort of hides his identity as a Jedi, possibly because he feels he's not entirely worthy of it. That was a really good character moment for Kanan, and it was also a really good character moment for the Inquisitor in the sense that he really knows how to get inside people's heads. And I think we saw that showcased here in that one little moment, more so than we did in either of the previous two episodes. So yeah, and the action itself, it was very, very well animated. I've been consistently impressed with the fluidity of this animation. It's a step above the Clone Wars, which I actually thought was top-notch. Particularly, again, in the later seasons, not so much in the first season, where they kind of had that almost, where they were really kind of stiff. And the Clone Wars movie, need we get started on that again. But yeah, the animation has been just so gorgeous in this show, and nowhere was that more prevalent, in my opinion, than the three-way lightsaber duel. But the way that these characters moved, the Inquisitor, Kanan, and Ezra, they were just so smooth, really almost movie quality. in terms of just how fluid a lot of their movements looked. Even the more acrobatic stuff. You could make the case, that triple kick that the Inquisitor did was a little cartoonish, but aside from that, now to tackle the stuff at the end of the episode. First and foremost, I will say I called it. Me and I, along with a lot of other people, did call it in regards to Fulcrum. I don't like to brag. I'm not bragging in the slightest. And I actually had a sort of an interesting little mini conversation with one of the commenters from the previous video about how, if it was Ahsoka Tano, which it turns out to be, then she would have these sort of lumps or these horn type things that would be showing in the hood. And in the back of my mind I was thinking, okay, that in theory you would think that would make sense, but you might be able to, but in another sense I might be able to see why they were sort of purposely misleading with that. How the creators would think that, oh, that's just a dead giveaway of what was supposed to be a very, very good surprise. And sure enough, it turned out to be Ahsoka, and she's still voiced by Ashley Eckstein. Still hasn't lost any of the finesse that she gained in voicing Ahsoka in the later seasons of the Clone Wars, because like I said, Ahsoka was really kind of annoying in the earlier seasons, but in the later seasons she actually grew into a really likable Star Wars character. And basically she looks, if you think back to the Mortis trilogy of the Clone Wars, and how you see an adult version of Ahsoka, she looks kind of like that. She has these really long head tentacle things, but at the same time the color scheme is not really quite as vibrant. She's not quite as red. She's more maroon-ish, which actually kind of surprised me how this show is much more colorful and vibrant than the Clone Wars, and they actually decolorized Ahsoka Tano. But in terms of character, Ashley Eckstein still does a pretty good job with the few lines that she does get. It was a pretty good surprise. It makes sense from a story point of view. And it actually contributed to something that I'll get to in a second. But at the end of the episode, I really kind of wish that they left the Inquisitor alive, because the Inquisitor basically says, there are some things that are far more painful than death. So he kind of kills himself by kind of dropping himself into an explosion, because we can assume that he doesn't really want to face Darth Vader or his superiors, knowing that he failed. But I actually kind of wish that they kept him around, and they had sort of fixed up his wounds, but said, you can continue to serve us as this new and improved version, or we can just torture you. We can just experiment on you. I really wish they had done something dark like that, but then I'm thinking, that might have been a little bit too extreme for Disney to really give the okay on. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm underestimating Disney, but I really wish they had kept the Inquisitor around, especially considering we saw him doing what he does best in utilizing his knowledge of Jedi to really make a Jedi sweat. Considering we actually saw him utilize his skills, and considering he has gotten a little bit more interesting as this season has gone on, I wish they had kept him alive. But on a more positive note, we have Darth Vader in the show. Darth Vader comes in at the end of the episode. You don't hear him talk, which I found kind of disappointing, considering they got James Earl Jones in the ABC version of the premiere. But yeah, the appearance of Darth Vader, the appearance of Ahsoka, and the appearance of all of these other rebels and these other sections ultimately banding together due to a need to rescue one of their own at the end, really all of this contributed to really something that Obi-Wan said in the original Star Wars, which was, you've taken your first step into a larger world. And I really feel like that was the case with this episode, because yeah, this whole season has been building this idea up of there being other groups of rebels out there, but they've really been kind of disconnected, and the main story has been on Lothal. But now it's really, there's nowhere to go but up, because you've introduced all of these other characters, all of these other concepts. You've introduced a whole wider galaxy for these Lothal rebels to potentially explore and tackle. And in addition, having these rebels band together and potentially be the first step toward the Rebel Alliance that we see in the original trilogy, yeah, I'm more excited than ever. Not only do we get to see old friends or old characters that we like Darth Vader and Ahsoka, but in addition, again, it's taking our first step into a larger world. It's taking our first real step into, having an actual rebel alliance rather than these little individual sectors of rebels that are sort of disconnected. So yeah, I'm more excited than ever for season 2, and frankly, it can't come fast enough. This show has really been a surprise for me, and don't let first impressions fool you. If you're a Star Wars fan and you don't mind the occasional lackluster episode, maybe like 1 or 2, then I highly recommend you check out this show. I think you might be surprised.